What's up? It's Wes, the Hobby Hermit, and today's video is a little different than maybe some of our other ones. We don't really have a specific technique we're trying to test out or some specific product we're going to be trying out. We're kind of just doing something fun. I picked up this miniature at my local game store. They kind of do like a flea market thing where people can go and sell pre-owned miniatures and board games and such. So I picked this up there. It was already completely pre-built, unprimed, and I thought it would be kind of interesting when I saw it. It was, a Balrog with a Khorne Bloodthirster axe attached to it. So this person had done kind of a simple conversion, and I saw it and I was like, that's kind of cool. And I thought, maybe what could I do to paint a Balrog in the style of Khorne while still kind of retaining, some of that Balrogginess, as it is. So that's kind of the whole point of this video, is I just wanted to kind of explore trying to combine two different elements into one miniature, kind of trying to make it a Bloodthirster Balrog and kind of take the essence from both of those things into one miniature. So overall, I would say the major kind of technique I explored in this was trying to paint fire in a way that looked enticing and cool and at least kind of realistic. Overall, I'm really happy with the effect I got on this miniature, and I think overall I accomplished my goal of trying to combine Khorne and Lord of the Rings into one miniature. So I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope you like some of the techniques I explored with this miniature. I want to touch briefly on the base coat that I did for this miniature. It was bought in just plain gray plastic, and I Radler canned it in a gray primer because that's all I had at the time, and then I airbrushed it entirely in the German black, or German gray, I guess is what it is, which is just a very kind of subtly gray tone black. So I airbrushed the entire miniature in that, and then I just did red airbrushing around the fire and the cracked skin area, just to kind of help with a subtle glow effect, and just to try and create a little bit of kind of difference on the miniature, especially because this is such a focal point of the back and the head. Try and differentiate it from the rest of the miniature, which is just primarily black. So I just did this to kind of add some character to the miniature and just really punch in all that red, orange, and yellow colors into that back area. So the first thing I started with on this miniature was the kind of flaming spine back piece that it has. It has like fire erupting out of its back in kind of a volcanic way. So that was kind of the first element I wanted to start on, just because I felt like it was really going to be a centerpiece of the miniature, and I thought it was going to kind of influence a lot of my decisions moving forward. So this is the first thing I wanted to start on. I initially started with putting a white base coat over the entire piece of the flame, because I wanted the fire to be bright. I wanted it to pop and stand out, and trying to do that over a black base coat was going to be a nightmare. I'd have to put so many layers in, and it would just take a lot of work, when I could just go in and put a white base coat and really kind of solve the problem for me really easily. So I really wanted to make sure this was bright and that it would pop. So the white base coat kind of accomplished that for me. So I think moving forward, if you're wanting to paint something bright, look at a brighter base coat, what you're painting, or you're going to have to put more layers down of whatever paint you're utilizing to try and make it more opaque and make it stand out more. If you want something darker and grittier, then go over a darker base coat. If you're painting, something grimdark, something a little bit more desaturated and like that, then you're going to want to look at a darker base coat. But fire is bright, so I wanted a bright base coat. I made heavy use of the contrast medium in this paint. What this kind of does is, the theory is that it makes any paint into a contrast paint, but kind of what I utilized it for the most, I would say, was to kind of give my paint a longer dry time. So it gave me a longer period of time for me to work with it and blend with it. And so how I utilized this for the fire was I made my kind of own yellow contrast paint and put it over the entirety of the miniature, or not the miniature, but the flaming spine piece itself. And this paint took a very long time to dry, so then I was able to go in with my orange and kind of create a blended effect of the yellow going into the orange, because fire has kind of this very noticeable transition in color in it. And so I'm trying to recreate this in the miniature by putting yellow all over and then keeping the yellow towards the bottom where it's brightest. And then as the flame kind of trails off, we kind of transition into an orange and then into a black.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And then we're going to transition into a brighter red and then to a darker red and then eventually black to kind of signify some smokiness at the tips. And all of this was done utilizing this contrast medium to give it a longer dry time, to give it more time to be blended and more time to be worked with, to kind of create that transition effect between each layer. And then if you feel that your layers are still maybe too harsh of a line, this is where you can go in with glazing to kind of smooth out all of those transition effects. Overall, I'm really happy with the fire effect I got on this miniature. I'm excited to try this out on future projects, and I'm feeling more confident every kind of paint job I do with utilizing the contrast medium to kind of create cool effects and kind of make the blending process a little easier, especially blending on the miniature, which is something I don't do a lot. So it was cool to actually accomplish this effect in a meaningful way and to have it come out looking as good as it did. So after I kind of finished creating all of the blending and transition effects on the fire, I went in with a very subtle highlight into each kind of layer of the blend to kind of really make all of the edges pop out a little bit more and stand out and just kind of help create the definition in it. So in the yellow part, I just went in with pure acrylic yellow and just kind of highlighted all the kind of very highest tips of all the flames. Did that with the same in the red, in the bright red, the orange, the dark red, and then on the black I just did a little bit of gray highlight. And all this does is just help create more definition in the miniature and create just kind of a higher contrast and especially when you're doing something like this fire, which is so bright and so standing out, creating that depth and definition is just such another step above in making it pop and look that much cooler, especially when it's such a focal point of the miniature. The next kind of major part that I painted on this miniature was the cracked skin on his back that's all leading into the fire, because you know the fire is supposed to be kind of erupting out of his back, and so I wanted to try and create a type of volcanic effect on his skin. I don't know if I'm crazy about the effect that I achieved on this miniature, but I think overall it looks good enough and makes the miniature look cool and complete in the way I did it. So all I did was just go in with my yellow contrast medium paint that I had on my palette from the fire and just lined all of the cracks with that. I wasn't too clean with it. I was pretty messy overall with it, just because I felt any type of overlap on the scales kind of gave it a marginal glowing effect, and worst case scenario I could go back in and clean it up with a red paint. And so I just did yellow through all the cracks, orange through all the cracks, red through all the cracks, and then another pure acrylic yellow through all the cracks, and then I just did a red glaze over the all of it to kind of help smooth the blends a little bit better. I don't think it looks amazing. It's definitely not the greatest, but it's very painstaking painting in between all those cracks, and I kind of went with the quick and dirty method, and overall I think it looks fine, and I think it, you know, achieves the effect of kind of creating the molten skin that's kind of splitting and cracking as the fire's coming out of his back. So it's definitely not my best work on a miniature, but I think it's good enough and I'm happy with it for this paint job. So another piece of this miniature that I really wanted to focus on was the face, of course, as this is probably the most time you spend on most of your miniatures is on their faces, just because our eyes are always drawn to look at the faces on miniatures. And so I was no different in this case. I really wanted to make sure that I put a lot of effort into it and made it look cool. I tried to kind of create this transitionary effect on the horn. I don't know, I just was very blend happy with this miniature. I wanted to create a bunch of different effects for whatever reason on this miniature. So I wanted to do kind of a more traditional horn color to black on the tips. And I brought out the contrast medium again and utilized that with Ushabti bone on the kind of inside edges of the horns, and then as it flowed out, I tried to kind of thin it down more, and then I just did some glazing at the end of the Ushabti bone into the black. And then I just did Agrax Earthshade and all the recesses on the horns, made sure not to try and get the tips as much as I possibly could, and then I did a highlight over all the tips in Ushabti bone as well. And then for the black, just left it black and then did gray highlights on it. I think overall, I'm really happy with this effect. I'm really enjoying utilizing this contrast medium, obviously, to give my paints a longer work time to try and create wet blends on the miniature. It does thin it down a lot, so I did find that I had to do multiple coats on this horns to get full coverage, especially because I was getting a lot of the black showing through. So that's something to note if you're going to utilize contrast medium in this way to try to give yourself a longer time to wet blend, is that it does thin it down and you will most likely have to put in multiple coats. So that's just something to think about, but overall, not a big deal. I'm pretty happy with the effect I got on the horns. I kind of achieved exactly what I wanted, which was the kind of normal bone horn color into the black, just to try and bridge those two worlds even more between a Bloodthirster and a Balrog. Just because Balrogs are primarily black and fire, like, you know, even in the lore, they're described as shadow and flame, so they're primarily very dark, fiery, so I really wanted to utilize these elements like the horns to try and bring the Bloodthirster in, just to create a little bit of difference in the miniature and break up all the black all over it. So for the face, I primarily utilized red as my highlight color. So I just utilized Sigvald Burgundy and Bale Red and Sun Scarlet, Evil Sun's Red, that's what it is, as my kind of three main colors. So I did Sigvald Burgundy highlight over all the raised edges on it, and then slowly mixed in Bale Red with Sigvald Burgundy and just layered those highlights over and over just to kind of create that very kind of simple black to red kind of demonish skin that I was kind of going for. I didn't want to go too crazy bright. I wasn't going to like a pink or even white highlight on this. I wanted to leave it relatively dark, but I still wanted to make sure that you could tell that it was red, just because overall I wanted it to feel like the miniature was kind of hot and full of fire and such. So this was kind of my method at doing that. For the mouth, I kind of decided to move farther away from the Balrog side of this, where it's just like a furnace inside of his mouth. Instead, kind of went more just bloodthirsty, demonic. Just did simple teeth, and then I did a purple to pink tongue, just to kind of give a little punch there on the miniature, just to help break it up, and help it stand out a little bit more. I'm really happy with the face. I think it turned out really good. The eyes, I just did Sigvald Burgundy, Bale Red, and then just an acrylic yellow, and then I did a red glaze over top. And I think it looks really good. I think the eyes kind of have a glow to them, and I really like that. So I think that glazes are honestly really important, and I think shine in eyes. I don't know what it is, but for whatever reason, glazes work really well in eyes. I think because it takes away a little bit of that punchiness of your white highlight and helps it kind of blend into the rest of what you painted on the miniature. So I'm a big fan of glazing eyes. The last focal point on this miniature that I wanted to focus on was the axe. I was talking to my chat. I was painting this miniature entirely on my Twitch stream, which if you're interested, you can check it out. I will be live tonight at 9 p.m. Central, as I am live every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Central. And you can watch me paint all the miniatures I paint for this channel live. You can have some input. You can discuss with me my process, and hopefully you can learn a little something and just have fun. We do some other stuff too, talking D&D, war games, maybe some video games and such too. So if something you're interested in, you can check out the Twitch stream. But I was discussing with my chat, and we decided that kind of a nasty, kind of gross flesh type of effect on the axe itself would be best, just to kind of give it kind of a creep factor and just kind of that you know, nastiness that demons and bloodthirsters and such have. So for the metallics, I just went true metallic metal on this. Just did a simple gunmetal over most of it, and then a gold on the banding, and then slapped a Nuln Oil heavy on this thing. I wanted it to look pretty grimy and dirty. You know, this axe has been killing a lot of people. I don't want it to look super pristine clean. So we slapped a ton of Nuln Oil on the metal for this. And then for the kind of flesh teeth parts on there, I utilize good old Talern Flesh from Citadel. I don't even know if they make this color anymore, but it is a sweet skin tone color. So I just utilize that in all of the flesh areas, and then I put Seraphim Sepia Wash over them, and then just went back and highlighted with the Talern Flesh. And honestly, I think it looks sweet. Very simple process for painting a flesh tone like this, and I honestly was really surprised with how it looked, and then when we added the blood effects a little later on, it really just gave it that much more kind of creepy nastiness that I was going for. The teeth I'm super simple on. I just paint them, use Shopty Bone. I make sure to get a really opaque layer, slap a bunch of Agrax Earthshade on there, and then highlight it back with the Shopty Bone. I keep my process pretty simple for these parts, especially on a miniature like this that it's not going to competition or display or something. So that's kind of my go-to process for horns and teeth is good opaque layer of Ushopti Bone, Agrax Earthshade, and then highlight again with the Ushopti Bone. So I was tempted to stop at this point because I did like how much it looked, but my chat was really pushing me to add a blood effect. So I was exploring how I wanted to do this effectively. So how I ended up doing it was that I put Sigvold Burgundy in all the recesses of the teeth, which gave it kind of like a dried blood effect. Then all the recesses of the teeth, like, you know, been eating and they dried up in there. Overall, really happy with that effect. And then the kind of, I didn't go super heavy on the blood splatter because, I don't know, I was really worried about it looking weird. So I kept the blood splatter kind of light for the most part, but the way I did this is I just took Bale Red contrast paint, thinned it down, and then I just put it on my paintbrush and just flicked it onto the miniature. So super simple. It's more effective. You can use something like a toothbrush or something like that. The brush I had wasn't great for it, but it got the job done, and I'm pretty happy with the blood effect. And overall, I'm happy that my chat convinced me to do this effect because I think it worked out pretty good on the miniature, and it definitely adds to the nasty, creepy feel of it. So just to finish up, the rest of the miniature, I just dry brushed gray. I didn't really want to spend a lot of time on it. The focal point of this miniature for me was the kind of back and head. So that's where I kind of put the most effort into, and then the axe as well. Those were kind of my three main focal points: the face, the back, and the axe, and so that's what I put the most time into. So I just kept everything else pretty simple, and I just dry brushed all of it. However, one additional effect I wanted to add to really drive home that I could utilize this as a Bloodthirster or Demon Prince in my 40k army was I just did some freehand painting of the Khorne symbol on each wing. I ended up redoing one because they were not symmetrical and it looked really funky. So I ended up using one of the spines on the wings as kind of my center point and was able to recreate on each wing that looked relatively symmetrical. My excuse was that it was supposed to look like, you know, it was painted on there by some Chaos Space Marines or Chaos Cultists or something like that. So that's why it doesn't look perfect. But overall, I think it's a simple little effect to really drive home the miniature, and that it's, you know, it is a demon of Khorne, and I think it's fun to kind of break up a big wide open space like this with some freehand or something like that to try and add some, you know, character to the miniature and just add some more details and have fun with it, which is really what I wanted to do with this miniature, and I'm really happy I did. I think the freehand looks pretty cool, and I think it adds to the miniature overall, especially when you're looking at it kind of down at a table or something like that. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this content, give it a subscribe, like this video, share it with all your nerdy friends. I'd really appreciate it. I'm really enjoying making these videos, and the response I've gotten through views and likes and stuff like that has been really positive, so I really appreciate that. If you like watching Twitch streams of painting miniatures and want to see how I paint all these miniatures live, you should check out my Twitch stream too. I'm going to be live tonight at 9 p.m. Central, and I'm live every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Central, and occasionally another night every once in a while, but those aren't as scheduled. So if you like that type of content, check it out. I really appreciate it. If you are interested in some 3D printed miniatures, you can check out my Etsy shop. Link will be down below. It's primarily, you know, D&D fantasy focused miniatures from a lot of my favorite designers. So if that's something you're interested in, you can check that out too. I'd really appreciate it. As always, subscribe, like, all that fun stuff. I have been Wes, the Hobby Hermit. Do not forget to elevate your game night.